Welcome back. As we talk about programming, it becomes very clear that data is central to interesting programming. See, when our problems get interesting, they're usually about, well, lots of data. And so now we're going to look at some ways to put together large amounts of data in a structure called the array. It's very powerful. Well, let's start by looking at this basic array demo, and I'll show you sort of a list of things. We have some buttons here. Let's show a list of books. These happen to be books written by some charming and lovable author who also tends to create online video series. Okay, so there's a list of books there. That's neat. It's just a list. We can also see a list of topics. Of course, nothing exciting about this, honestly. We're just seeing stuff show up in the form. What's interesting isn't really what we can see, but what we can't see, what's hidden underneath. And so let's take a look at the code to see exactly what's happening here. Inside of the code, you'll see that, once again, the HTML, not that exciting. Couple of buttons, an output area. Inside the functions, though, we can see some things, and also we see pieces of the code that are not in functions. First of all, we see some variables that are created outside of any functions. As you recall, these variables are very special. Every once in a while, we'll make a really important variable that does not live in any particular function. You don't want to do this too often because you're responsible for it. But it is useful when you have a very important variable that doesn't belong to any particular function but belongs to the entire program. Now, the variables that I have declared this way are output, books, and topic. Another interesting thing is that we do have an initialization function. If you look down at the HTML, you'll see body on load gets init. That means, hey, when the body is finished loading, go run the init. I want to set some stuff up. That's what an init function does. It allows me to initialize things. All right, great. So let's take a look at init and see what happens in there. Well, init does, of course, initialize. I told you. And so here's how it works. We're going to initialize the output area. That's pretty standard. We've done that before, right? We'll go ahead and do that get element by ID business. I'm only going to do that once in init, so I don't have to do it in the other two functions. Okay, good. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize some special variables. You see, books is the name of a variable. It's a variable I created at the general level, but it's a special kind of a variable. Up until now, our variables have been able to contain only one thing, and I guess that makes sense. But books is a special type of variable called an array. And an array can contain many things. Single variable, lots of stuff. It's like a list, right? What are we getting at the store? Well, I need eggs, I need milk. Right, that's more than one thing, right? So that is a list of things. It's one thing, it's a list, but it's a list of a lot of things. Okay, that's what arrays do. And we'll take a look at the way the array is built, and it is created in JavaScript with this array keyword. Watch, that needs to be a capital A in array. Array is just a fancy term for a special kind of list in computer memory. And when I create an array, one way of building it is like this. I'll just go ahead and feed it a list of the stuff that I want. So my array contains these several pieces of strings, these several pieces of text. The name of that book, the name of that book, the name of that book, and so on. Actually, these are a little old. I've done some newer ones. But here we go. So here's the name of some books here, and they are all encased in quotes because they're all strings, and they are all followed by commas. Okay. At the end, I have the end parenthesis, because that's part of this, hey, build the array. And then, of course, the semicolon, because this is all one big old huge mama line. So in JavaScript, array is the name of a function. You feed it a bunch of values, and it creates an array with those values in it. Does that make sense? Okay, sort of. All right, so we created the books array. Let me show you another way to build an array, because sometimes you know everything that's going to be in the array up front, sometimes you don't. So let's take a look at another way to do it. Line 23 shows the topics array. And this is a list of topics that one might write, books about. And this time I created a little bit differently. Rather than having a list of items, inside the array statement I have a single integer. Well, when I put a single integer in the array statement, it says, hey, make an array with room for 5 things in it, in this case. Okay, so you can either create an array by indicating the stuff that's going to go in it right away, or how many things will go in it. Okay? Okay. And like ordinary JavaScript objects, arrays can be of pretty much any type of stuff you want, which is not true in every language, but it's pretty handy. So I've created two arrays. There's books. This one I preloaded. I've also created topics. This one I've said how many elements will be in there. Okay, well, regardless of how I build the array, if I want to access the members of it, well, I have to have a special syntax. Well, think about this. Think about putt-putt golf, right? I have a score. Well, actually, I have several scores. So the first hole, I get there, tuck, 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 do it in 3. Woohoo, par. Okay, so that's great. Now, the second one, I hit it, and I miss it, and I bank it off a small child, and okay, so 5. Okay, great. So is my score 3 or 5? And the answer is, well, I have more than one score. I have a score for each hole. Golf score is kind of like a list. There's a lot of them. So how do we tell them apart? We use the index. We use the whole number. Okay, that's the same way it works with arrays. In arrays, typically we use a numeric index to tell the pieces apart. Now, one thing unusual about the way we count in computing is that we normally begin counting with the 0. So topics sub 0. Sometimes those square braces you read as sub. So topic sub 0, the first element isn't element number 1. It's element number, you got it, 0. That's HTML5. Topic sub 1 is CSS3. Topic sub 2, and so on. Wait a minute. So the numbers go 0 to 4? Yep, they do. How many is that? Count them with me. 0, 1, 2. Oh, I'm missing one. 3, 4. There could be 5 elements. I skipped one. But they will count from 0 to 4. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay, so at the end of init, I have created these two arrays in memory, and I'm going to be able to work with them. Now, why would you do this? That's a really good question. Honestly, the reason that you work with arrays is the same reason that you carry a list. Imagine if you're going grocery shopping, and rather than having a single list, you had every item on a different Post-it note, right? So you could have Post-it notes all over the cart. I could just see somebody shopping like this. It would be me. All right, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Well, that's too difficult, right? Having all those different Post-it notes is going to be too difficult to keep track of. What I need is a single entity that represents a lot of different things. That's going to be much easier, right? I want to hang on to one list, even though that one list has a lot of values. Because the whole idea of having a list is that, in a sense, it's one thing, but it's also a lot of things. Sometimes it's more convenient for me to think of it as one thing. It's one list. Sometimes it's more convenient for me to think of it as a lot of things. It's a lot of groceries to buy. And the best thing about a list is that I can walk through each thing on the list. Did I get apples? Check. Did I get milk? Check. Did I get cereal? Check. Did I get sugar? Check. So you can go through each item in the list and find out if you got it. Right? So we love lists because they allow us to group things. And an even nicer thing about lists is if they're in order, is an easy way to go through, and the most common thing to do with a list is go through it and do something with each item. Check to see if I've got it. Try to find it in the grocery store. Pay for it. Whatever. You got it? Let's take a look at show books and see how it works. Output inner HTML is empty. Fine. That makes sense, right? We'll just start by cleaning out our plaything. Now, here's something interesting. Line 33 is a loop. It's a for loop. Okay. Now, this shouldn't surprise you too much because the for loop, remember, that was great for counting. But do you know the most common time that you want to count stuff in programming? You got it, when you're going through a loop. For loops and arrays are natural companions. They're just beautiful together. Peanut butter and jelly. Because a lot of times when I have an array, I have a bunch of things. Well, I want to iterate through the array. I want to do something with each item. Typically, I'll use a for loop. And the for loop very often looks something like this. So I got some counter, I. We'll start it out at 0, and this isn't surprising because indices begin with 0. Then my condition is I is less than books.length. Well, what does books.length mean? Books.length is the length of the books array. That is, how many elements are in this array. You got that? You got that. Okay, cool. So that's how many elements are in this array. Okay, that's beautiful. Now, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements in the array. So I is less than 5. What this means is it'll stop at 4. Okay, there you go. I plus plus. So this loop will have I go from 0 to the length of books. Now, why did I say books.length? Why didn't I just say 5? Well, because I don't mean 5. I mean the length of books. This array, maybe it'll change. Maybe I wrote another book. Maybe I got rid of one. And so whatever the array is, I don't really care about what number that is. I really want to say the length of the books array. And so for one thing, that length may change. More importantly, in my code, I don't want any magic numbers. I don't want a 5. I don't know what 5 means. But books.length, I know what that means. That means the length of the books array. Okay? Okay. And then, once we've got this loop set up, then any code inside the loop can be act on the current array element. So books sub I, hey, when I is 0, that's going to be books 0, flash game programming. And when I is 1, that's going to be the next one, game programming L line, and on and on and on we go. You see it? Yeah, you see it. Okay, so the reason that we love to put together loops and arrays is because I can write code that seemingly handles only one element, but since that code is inside a loop, it acts on every element in the loop, and it doesn't matter if that array gets huge, the code stays just as simple. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Let me show you another variation of the for loop you'll sometimes see. And that's in this second function, show topics. All right, so here we go. Output.inner HTML gets empty again. All right, I got that. And here's a variation of the for loop you'll sometimes see. Now it says for topic ID in topics. Now what this does is almost the same. It's a little bit of a shortcut. And what it does is it steps through the available topic ideas, 0, 1, 2, and we skipped to 3, 4. And so it will give me all of the potential elements, at least all the indices. And now I can use that index to look up the item with a somewhat simpler for loop. Now, truthfully, I don't use this approach very much in JavaScript, and the reason is there's a variation of it in other languages that's slightly different. I typically just use this version, but they're both okay, and you could see them both. So both of these loops work great. They go through and give me all the indices available, and then I can work with each element. That way I write code for one, and I can see the code for all of them. Pretty cool, huh? Let me show you one more example here. We're going to go back to our old friend, The Ants Go Marching In. I know, that song finally got out of your head. It's going back right there. Now, okay, we look at it, it looks exactly the same, right? Right. Except it's longer. We look at it this time, and this variation is different. Because, see, I don't really like the if-else thing that we did last time. Take a look at what happens here. I have a variable called distraction list. And it's interesting because it's an array. Element 0 is empty. Element 1 is suck his thumb, tie a shoe, climb a tree, shut the door. Oh, you're seeing it, right? 0, nothing. 1, suck his thumb. 2, tie a shoe. 3, climb a tree. I'm noticing a pattern. I carefully lined these up so the verse number would correspond with the index of these elements if they are seen as an array. Okay, good for you. All right, now we take a look at the rest of it. The chorus looks pretty much like it did before. In fact, exactly. The verse looks pretty similar, but look at this, that whole slew of if statements that was bad enough with just 2 elements, but would have gotten really messy when we were at 5 or 100. Well, now that whole slew of if statements is replaced by a single array lookup. Here I say distraction is distraction list sub verse number. Ooh, in a beautiful situation like this where I can use an integer to find something else in a list, well, I can use an array. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Anytime you have a list of things in a computer game or a computer program, they're usually an array. All of the ghosts in Pac-Man in a modern version would be done as an array. All of the aliens in any of your shoot 'em ups, they're an array. Usually each of the boards in a game that has puzzles and so on, Sudoku or whatever, each of those is an array. Whoa. Yeah. Arrays are very powerful because they allow us to group a lot of data together. Now watch what happens. The verse is very simple because once I've got distraction, the rest of it is the same. But that's not the most beautiful part. Take a look at make song. Now because I have the numbers, I can create a little for loop. Verse num is 1, verse num is less than distraction list length, verse num plus plus. Now I simply say verse, send it verse num, and chorus. Do that in a loop. And the beautiful thing is that even if the data itself changes, so I add or delete verses, no problem. No problem, because I can still I can still go through with one loop and be able to play the whole song. Whoa, that's crazy, isn't it? So do you see why we love arrays? We do love arrays. They allow us to handle a lot of data. So just like functions allowed us to encapsulate and group commands, arrays allow us to encapsulate and group data. Ha ha ha. Okay, we've learned a lot of stuff here, but what we've got to do next is make a game. And so our next unit will go ahead and make a complete game using the kinds of stuff that we've done so far. And then after that, we're finally ready to do graphics. Are you ready? I know you're ready. Okay, I'll see you then. Take care.